Mike, I turn on. Yep. Okay.
Well, actually, should I?
So, speakers, we are aiming for like 7 to 10 minutes in your opening remarks. I will try to flash.
So when I'm done. Okay. Okay, good evening and welcome. My name is Rebecca Fricka, and I am the spokesperson for the Amherst League of Women Voters. The League has organized tonight's meeting with the town of Amherst and the Amherst Affordable Housing Trust. And the program is co-sponsored by many other organizations listed on the slide. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that seeks to inform voters about elections, voting, and issues. As an organization, we neither support or oppose political parties or candidates. The League works at the local, state, and national levels. We study issues, and through the process of consensus, we come up with positions we can act on. At the state level, we have a position adopted in 2008 that in summary states, the League supports programs, policies, and regulations to address the housing needs of low and moderate income families and individuals. Everyone should have access to decent and affordable housing in a suitable living environment. Thank you all, to all of our panelists, to Rep. Dom, and to Allegra Clark, Gaston de los Reyes, John Hornick, and Greg Rashane for helping to put this program together. At this point, I would like to turn the microphone over to Gaston.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for inviting the Housing Trust of Amherst to support this event. So my role is limited to telling you who our speakers are and trying to keep us on schedule so that we can be engaging in Q&A by 8 o'clock or so. But just by way of setting the stage, this country is way behind building the homes that we need for the people who live around us. But we are at a moment with a great burst of energy. August 2024, Governor Healy signed the Affordable Homes Act, authorizing $5 billion in spending and, among other things, opening up the building of ADUs in single-family zoning districts. Just yesterday, the University of Massachusetts put out a request for proposals for developers to, quote, create a comprehensive long-range plan to modernize campus housing and maintain affordability for decades. Speaking for our trust, we adopted a strategy premised on development, funding that development, and education, which is what we're here to do with Allegra's leadership. And we have a lot of projects that are in progress that you're going to hear about tonight. So before I introduce the speakers one by one as they're about to speak, let me just tell you the range of what will be covered. Allegra Clark will be telling us about why we need affordable housing so desperately in our community. Laura Baker will be telling us about how projects move through government and become reality. Peter Serafino is going to be telling us about how these projects actually get financed. Keith Ferry is going to be telling us about a number of the exciting projects that are coming to this valley in Amherst. And Representative Mindy Dome will be moderating the Q&A and making this an engaging experience. So first, Allegra Clark. She is a social worker, grew up in Amherst. In addition to a longstanding member of Amherst Affordable Housing Trust, she's leading the charge with our education initiative and is chair of Amherst Community Safety and Social Justice Committee.
Thank you, Gaston. Is this on? Can you hear me? You're good. Okay. So I'm Allegra Clark, and I am going to talk a little bit about the need for more affordable housing opportunities in town. I'm going to focus on both the needs from the unhoused population that we have here, the rent affordability gap, and the homeownership affordability gap. So our Municipal Affordable Housing Trust is a group working to create and maintain affordable housing opportunities in Amherst today and tomorrow. We're made up of town staff and residents working to promote affordable housing that provides quality homes for Amherst residents at all stages of life. Primarily, we promote these goals by providing funding to developers, engaging in outreach around housing initiatives, and providing support and guidance to town government. We have the opportunity to partner with various organizations doing work in and around Amherst. And so I'm going to share some of the information that they've provided to me about what they're seeing on the ground right now. I did have the opportunity to speak with Tim McCarthy, who is the director over at Craig's Doors, which is our primary shelter provider in town. He informs me that currently there are 28 individuals at the congregate shelter at the Lutheran Church, and there are additionally 6 overflow spots on particularly cold nights. So there are certain degrees of temperature that necessitate additional shelter beds to open up. And those have been active in the recent days. Additionally, there are 58 people currently at the non-congregate shelter, which is through the Econo Lodge in Hadley. And 20 of those placements were recently funded through the state's winter expansion funding. So they have been able to move some guests onto the second floor as well, because they were able to get additional funding for both staffing and for the rooms. There are additionally 16 individuals in 15 apartment units in the low threshold housing program. And so they do keep a comprehensive list of people who are turned away from shelter beds every night. And that will additionally sometimes trigger finding more emergency placements. And there were 69 additional individuals that they had to find placements for. They tell me that there have been more hotel stays in December of 2024 than in all of the previous winter combined. So the urge is dire right now in our community. Additionally, there are 48 unsheltered people that they are still trying to find resources for in the area. So that is a little bit on the ground in terms of the unhoused population. We are very fortunate that the beautiful East Gables building opened recently, thanks to Valley. And in terms of some of the data captured from their application process, and this for those who don't know is the, I'm blanking on the word for the size of the unit, studio. It's a recently opened studio apartment home right near Amherst College, and there are 28 units, and there were 508. Oh, I have control of this. Let's see. Oh, but I didn't put a slide in for that. Just kidding. There are 501 applicants for 28 of the units, and of those 501 applicants, 141 of them qualified for local preference, which meant people who live, work, or have kids in the Amherst school system. And then about 26 of the 28 units were filled by people from previously unstable housing situations who were coming into those new units and having ties to this community. So again, 501 applicants for 28 units shows that there's a significant need in our community and the surrounding communities for affordable housing. So the town of Amherst is currently in the housing production plan process, and we're working with Barrett Planning Group, and they have just published their public survey results. So I have drawn some data from it because it's very comprehensive. So there were 322 completed responses to the survey, and the top 3 housing concerns identified were lack of affordable renting options, more affordable homes for first-time homeowners, and the impact of off-campus student housing on neighborhoods. I think very tellingly, 82% of renters who answered the survey were experiencing significant housing cost burdens in the past year, and 31% of homeowners were experiencing significant housing cost burdens in the past year. In terms of the current median income for owner-occupied households in Amherst, the median income is $137,102 compared to $37,617 for renter-occupied housing households, which is a pretty significant gap. And then when you take into consideration what rent costs in Amherst, currently the typical studio price from the market rent survey of November 2024 is $1,926 for 286 square feet. And a 4-bedroom, the average rent is $4,629 for a 1,417 square foot home, which means that Amherst rent prices are 11% higher than the national average. So rent here is really unaffordable, and people are burdened with high costs of housing. And it's similar with home ownership. Again, from the same survey, the median sales price for a home in Amherst in 2024 was $600,000, whereas the maximum affordability was about $285,176, meaning the affordability gap is larger than the highest affordability based on the median income. So those are some of the reasons that we need more affordable homes in this area. Thank you.
So much on that, Grace. So Laura Baker is real estate project manager with Valley Community Development, with decades of experiences in community development, including Hampshire Community Action Commission and Hilltown CDC. And she is actively developing affordable homes in our valley.
Good evening. I'm very pleased to be here. See a lot of familiar faces tonight, so welcome everyone. Oh, there I am. So I'm going to talk a little bit about planning and permitting. It's a complex path that we have to weave and wind through to get to actually build affordable housing here in Amherst, as well as other places in Massachusetts. So I'm going to talk about it in the context of using East Gables, which is a building that Allegra mentioned that's at 132 Northampton Road in Amherst. Greg. I'm stuck. So one of the things that's interesting for me, and I know for volunteers that we work with, is kind of where does affordable housing start? Where does the concept come from? Who decides what's going to get built and where and how? So in my experience, there are 2 primary drivers for this kind of origin. One is an identified community need can drive a design, which I'm going to talk about in the case of East Gables. And the other is that a real estate opportunity can also drive program design. And I just threw the East Street School down there because a lot of communities have vacant buildings like schools that then become kind of the genesis for affordable housing development. So East Gables, as I mentioned, the town had repeatedly and rigorously identified the need for small studio apartments, particularly for homeless individuals. This was back when Amherst had, a seasonal homeless shelter. Folks it would close. People had nowhere to live. They were living outside. And so hearing that echoed in a number of committees in town, Valley Community Development, where I work, we began a search for a site. So we didn't have a site. We just knew that the town had this expressed need. So we searched for a site for over 2 years. The town assisted us by funding some of that work with a grant. So we had to, analyze different sites. We were looking at zoning, we were looking at soils, we were looking at all kinds of factors. We were working with engineers and architects. And so it helped to have some walking around money to do that. We probably looked at about 24 sites in the town of Amherst, specifically for this need. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong with this clicker. So these are the ingredients as we've defined them for successful affordable housing development. First, site and location. Second, having local advocates and champions. Third, having a viable scale. Fourth, having an interested developer who has experience and capacity. And fifth, having a realistic timeline. And we're going to break those down a little bit more. So location, location, location. For me, as an affordable housing developer, really the central, most important item is the site, where it is, what its characteristics are. Everything kind of organizes itself around having a site. I've seen communities really spin their wheels talking about affordable housing in absence of a site. You have to have a place to build. So you want it to be, in our opinion, central, buildable, having public utilities, water and sewer are pretty critical, big enough that you can build at a viable scale. I'll talk more about that. A location that makes sense to our friends in Boston, who don't always understand how things work out here in Western Mass. It has to come at a reasonable cost, and it has to be available with a patient seller. So the work that we do takes a long time. And so we're looking for locations that can be patient or ways to acquire them during a long holding period, which adds cost to the project. I do hear a lot of communities also talk about sites that would be ideal for affordable housing that are not in fact available. And it is a real dead end. So I would discourage that kind of conversation. So site selection, in my view, is half the battle. Hey, Greg. So the state of Massachusetts also has priorities for us to think about when we look at sites. They're very interested in us having transit-oriented and walkable locations, meeting smart growth standards, meaning dense development, preserving land, and not having some red flag issues like hazardous materials or endangered species. So when we looked at 132 Northampton Road, from our lens, looking as affordable housing developers, these were some of the advantages that we saw. It was for sale at a price we could afford. It was a large parcel, just under an acre and kind of level, near town center and shopping. There were new sidewalks coming. It was near the bike trail, and you could walk to bus stops. It had public water and sewer. There were no wetlands, floodplains, endangered species, and most of the abutting landowners are Amherst College. And that we saw as an advantage. And I think in the final analysis did prove to be an advantage of the site. Local champions are also incredibly important. We are sometimes met with some skepticism as developers coming from maybe outside of a community. So we're always looking for folks like everyone here who's interested in affordable housing, who lives in a community. Often these folks are active in local government, churches, nonprofits, and their role is very important. They kind of rally local support, turn out people, get letters written, and make the case, as we're going to do tonight, about why affordable housing should be important to the people in Amherst. And if you don't know what a local champion looks like, you should look over at John Hornick, because John Hornick is the ultimate local champion. And without him, we would not have built East Gables, I promise you. And I feel like we all in this room stand on John's shoulders as we do this work. In addition to kind of general support, we build project-specific support at many levels, as you can imagine. Local boards, people who have lived experience, either being homeless or as low-income tenants, a variety of community groups, funders, and neighbors. We do a lot of outreach with neighbors. In the case of East Gables, I think most people may know, maybe people don't know, the neighbors were highly concerned about this new development in their neighborhood. And so there was a lot of time spent in conversation with neighbors around this particular development. That happens to a more or less degree in any development. I would say East Gables was kind of toward the extreme end of how much concern was raised by neighbors. These are some of our local champions, a select board, the trust, planning board. John started the Affordable Housing Coalition, which supported us. And the Amherst College students wrote really brilliant and engaging articles in their newspaper in support of this project. And other local nonprofits also supported us. It's very important to have municipal support. And so the state, when they look at funding a project, they do put in most of the money. They're looking to see that the town has also put in money. And it gives us a competitive advantage in a very a competitive environment to raise money for a project if there are local funds in. They're often the first money in. They're kind of a leap of faith money, and they help us leverage the larger sources that we need from the state. So process. One of the hallmarks, I would say, of Amherst is process. And in our world, this comes at a cost. So there are a lot of costs associated with having a longer process. If you're old enough to recognize this cartoon, raise your hand. So it's a Far Side cartoon. Einstein discovers that time is actually money. That is kind of how it feels to us. Every year, I would say, especially the last 5 years, every year of delay in a project, we are talking probably $1 to $3 million in increased cost, just construction costs, never mind soft costs. So it's something to take very seriously. How much process is needed to get to the outcome and weighing the cost of that process. So building costs escalate, and some other things happen. We have to pay our experts, and actually the codes change as we're going through the process, and that can increase costs as well. Next. So in the case of East Gables, some kind of noteworthy examples of time costs associated with process. The town requested, as the developer, we delay submitting to the state a precursor document to our zoning permit. They asked us that, I think, 4 times. It was about 7 months that we waited. We waited to hold a significantly large community meeting. And then we spent a little more than 6 months with the Zoning Board of Appeals in about 24 hours of hearings over, I think we had 9 meetings. So very lengthy, very detailed zoning process. And so you add all that up and you're looking at maybe 1.5 years of things that really just had to do with process. And I'm sure that we probably added $2 to $3 million in cost as a consequence of that process. So viable scale comes up a lot, especially in small towns. People would like us to build a few units here and a few units there. Thank you, Estelle. We really need to hit 20 units or more to be able to access state funds and also to be able to operate a property efficiently, pay for staff, et cetera. And the tool that we most often use and have used in Amherst is called Chapter 40B. It allows us to request waivers from local zoning. The waiver we request the most is for increased density. It's intended to be a one-stop kind of streamlined process. And as I mentioned in Amherst, it tends to turn into a very extensive process with a lot of opportunities for community participation. Oh, so I mentioned this before. Chip on my shoulder. So we have 6 months, 9 meetings with the ZBA, 91 public comments submitted, 89 permit conditions. And just an aside that what the conversation is at those meetings often doesn't match the concerns that tenants or occupants will have. So the people who are evaluating the project have very different worldviews than the people who will live in it. So we're building for people who are living in their car, and there's a long conversation about how much closet space is enough. It's just a little bit of a mismatch that we see. So cities and towns that expedite permitting will have more bites at the state funding apple and will create more affordable housing. This is hugely important. You need to have a developer. There is, in fact, a shortage of developers in Western Mass. So one of John's hallmark statements was his job was to set the table so that Amherst could attract developers. So they would want to come and build in Amherst. It's a long process. So people need to be realistic. And also at the same time that you're being realistic, you have to run like heck to have it not take even longer. And you need allies that understand it's going to take a long time and are going to stay with you through the course of it. So ways that localities can support affordable housing development. I've mentioned these, I'm not going to repeat them, but streamlined permitting is a big one. Local funds, local champions, and town properties are sometimes helpful, sometimes they're burdensome. Just a cautionary note there. We sometimes get the white elephant properties that are really, really expensive to redevelop. And then I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Wonderful education. Thank you so much, Laura. Our next speaker, Peter Serafino, is Senior Project Manager with Home City Development out of Springfield, Massachusetts, previously with Wayfinders. He's experienced not only in managing the construction side of housing projects, but is also expert in securing financing, which is will be his focus. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So I will talk to you about financing these projects, and we're pretty much all using the similar tools, but I'll give you a little case study of a property that Home City Development is currently developing in the town of Pelham. The site's about 2.5 miles from here at 20 to 22 Amherst Road, just up the street a little bit. And Amethyst Brook Apartments is a 34-unit, 2-building development. It's under construction right now, as I said, and it consists of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments that are going to be affordable to households earning up to 60% of area median income. And then we've also got some other tiering where there's a couple of apartments that are available to folks up to 50% of area median income, and then another tier for folks who have incomes of up to 30% of area median income. And the project was conceived by Home City Development Executive Director and Amherst resident Tom Kegelman, who's here with us tonight, along with Pelham resident and longtime affordable housing consultant and chair of the Pelham Housing Committee, Tillman Lucas. They came up with an idea to build affordable housing in the town of Pelham, town of 1,300 people, very rural town, with really few good sites for development due to the topography, due to lack of utilities, due to conservation easements, water restriction easements. I mean, a lot of reasons to not develop affordable housing at any scale in the town of Pelham. And Tom and Tillman found a site that actually did make some sense for affordable housing. The Amherst Water and Sewer runs up Amherst Road right past this site. And that was something that was definitely in its favor. And it was a site that had been previously developed. Going back to the 1820s, there was a sawmill and then later a factory that built bamboo fishing fly rods on this site. So it was a previously developed site along Amethyst Brook. It was a waterfront site. So there was a lot of caution, a lot of care that had to go into the planning because of the environmental considerations of the site. It's about a half mile from the Amherst Pelham town line. And as I said, has the benefit of the public water and sewer. That made that was an important factor. And it was a total of 2 parcels that total 12 acres. It was purchased by Home City Development in 2018 and 2019. In August of 2021, we completed the Chapter 40B Zoning Board of Appeal and the Chapter 40B comprehensive permit process, and the ZBA issued a comprehensive permit. We then began applying for the funding, and finally were afforded the affordable housing resources we needed to build the project in December of 2022. And we closed on all the financing in October of 2023, and we're almost done construction now. We've got a 6-unit building that will be occupied next month, and we've got a 28-unit building that will be finished in May and occupied in May. And as I mentioned, we purchased 12 acres, but it's only a 2.6 acre development site because so much of the land is undevelopable. And we were fortunate we were able to donate a small sliver of land to Habitat for Humanity, so they were able to expand their site so they could build 2 homes instead of 1. So we were happy about that. And then when we're done construction, we're going to be donating about 8 acres to the Kestrel Land Trust, and it'll be preserved as conservation land. So, a lot of public benefit from this. The 20-unit building is design certified to passive house standards, so it's a highly energy efficient building. And the smaller 6-unit building is designed to meet Energy Star standards. They're all electric buildings, solar panels, EV charging stations, et cetera. And so let's talk about the financing for a minute. The acquisition financing, we had to go out and borrow money to buy the site originally, and that was provided by the Life Insurance Community Investment Initiative. And then we also got pre-development funding from Community Economic Development Assistance Corporation, and both were loans. And by the time we finally closed and started construction oh, thank you. Yeah, we've got a few slides here. I forgot about the slides. By the time we finally closed and started construction, we had borrowed about $2 million. And our small, not-for-profit, mission-driven organization was at risk for over $2 million. And, those that went for site acquisition, site security, insurance, holding costs, survey, all the design costs, the legal costs to get us through the 40B process. So pretty significant investment. But fortunately, we were able to, we had a good site, we had a good project, and ultimately we're able to close on all the financing and start construction. And so let's talk a little bit about what some of those funding sources were. Well, first and foremost, we use the federal low-income housing tax credits, and those are the primary funding source for the construction in this project and in almost all affordable housing projects. It's the largest generator funding source of affordable housing in the United States. And it's a credit it's a federal credit, but it's awarded by each state. So we apply to Executive Office of, now known as Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, for these federal affordable housing tax credits. And then Massachusetts has its own low-income housing tax credit program as well. And that was another important source of funds here. Of course, the town of Pelham also provided early in, the first money in was Community Preservation Act money. And for a very small town, they provided $500,000 towards this project. And that was a real sign of commitment by the leaders of the town of Pelham. And that's really important money to have in all these projects. Sends the right message. And then the other next most important source is state soft debt. Soft loans are loans that don't amortize, don't get paid back unless you refinance at some point in the future. That was also through Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And then we also applied for Section 8 project-based vouchers and a Massachusetts project-based voucher known as an MRVP. And those rental vouchers are key to allowing us to rent units to people at 30% and 50% of area median income who wouldn't be able to afford the rent on their own. I mean, for example, the HUD-determined fair market rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is somewhere around $1,250. 2-bedroom apartment is around $1,600 a month, and the fair market rent for a 3-bedroom is about $2,000 a month. So these households can't afford even those rents. And those are capped rents. Those are restricted rents without a rental voucher, where they would then pay 30% of their income towards the rent, and the public sector makes up the difference. I mentioned the CPA funds. That was important. We also received funds from Eversource and Mass DEP for to incentivize us to put in EV chargers at this location. And then Mass Saves also provides some incentives for building to passive house and Energy Star standards. Those are, yet more applications that we have to fill out and other hoops we have to jump through. But even in small chunks, they're all really critical. Bank ESB, also known as East Hampton Savings Bank, they were our construction lender, and they're providing permanent financing for the project. Good local bank that we've done a couple projects with now, and It's been a successful partnership. And then with the tax credits, we then selected a tax credit syndicator who goes out and actually finds the private sector money. And in this case, we've used Mass Housing Investment Corporation based out of Boston. And they use a multi-investor pool. So they've got a number of mostly banks that provide the capital that becomes the equity that is the primary funding source for this and all of our projects. And then the Mass LIHTC equity is provided by a company called Dorfman Capital. And they use a variety of investors. In this case, I think it was an insurance company out of Connecticut. And then, of course, as developer, Home City Development provides defers some of its developer fee, and it takes it back. It goes into the project as a loan, and we get it back over time out of project cash flow. And that's the outline of the typical sources that almost all of us use. And one of the unintended consequences of this project is that now Home City Development is now when the project's complete at 34 units, will be the largest owner of multifamily property in the town of Pelham. I can't say that about too many other towns that we operate in. And, in Massachusetts, we're fortunate to have a very robust affordable housing industry with public policies and tools that help us to build this affordable housing. But, even with those tools in place, it really comes down to, as Laura had indicated, it's about time and money. It's about managing time and money. And, in this case, it was a 7-year development cycle, at least a 7-year development cycle. By the time and I'm talking about from property acquisition to tenants moving in, but there was a significant time frame when Tom and Tillman were looking at sites and determining this site. And then, until we bring in all the money and pay off the construction loan, there's still some time after that. So 7 years is a long time to wait for 34 units in my book. And then I think that financial risk, along with that time frame, tends to disincentivize folks from wanting to develop affordable housing. But at the same time, the demand for the resources is tremendous throughout the entire state, which is why it takes a couple of funding cycles to get the resources we need. And in our case, as I think back on it, the ZBA did its part, and they got us in and done in about 6 months, and that was a really positive process. And I give a lot of credit to the folks of the town of Pelham. We had champions. We had a lot of champions in the town of Pelham, and that went very well. And then, we were able to get funded on our second application into the state, which, again, I've had it take 3 times before, and it's still a long wait, but all these times add up, and that adds to risk, as Laura had said. And I guess my final thought about the whole financing of these deals and the time it takes is that, we all know that the lack of affordable housing is a problem that's national in scope. But I think this Amethyst Brook Apartments in Pelham is an example of how, a hyper-local, a very small town can help contribute. There are big solutions to the problem, but there's also small solutions to the problem. And this is the kind of thing that, with the right champions and the right time and the right effort and the right site can really make a difference. So those are my comments.
Wonderful, thank you. It takes a village of funders to get this going. Keith Ferry is president and CEO of Wayfinders, which he joined in 2020, previously serving as senior vice president at Enterprise Community Partners, a national nonprofit dedicated to increasing the housing supply around the country. Keith.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. I'm also an Amherst resident. I don't know if you said that. Did you say that?
No, I didn't. That's an important point indeed.
My Amherst credentials out here too. So how many people now want to develop affordable housing after listening to my colleagues here? Simple, right?
Some brave souls.
Yeah, between these two, myself, Tom, and others, there's generations of knowledge here. It shouldn't take that to build housing that we need for our communities. It shouldn't take that to help us meet our regional needs. We created this system because of politics. We've created this system because we're not really understanding the need and the urgency around it. And so it is, I was smiling listening to my colleagues talk about the challenges and trying to share their experiences, but it's really important for you to understand how difficult it is. That's why there aren't many people doing this work, because it takes so much time, so much energy, so much resource, and so much specific knowledge to get through all these processes. When you look at other developments in town, they don't have 11 sources. That's what I counted that you had up there, 10 or 11 sources. They don't have that. They don't have to go around multiple application cycles and all of these things. So when you're dealing with an affordable housing developer, you're dealing with someone who is kind of run the gauntlet to get the housing done, who's taken a lot of risk as in terms of the time. You hope the project will go forward. Lots of things can happen, but why are we doing this? And so we're doing this because, as Allegra started with talking about, there's real needs here in Amherst, but it's not just unique to Amherst, and I think we all know this now. Does it work now? Yes, it does. The need is regional. The need is statewide. The need is actually throughout the country. I've worked in housing for over 25 years myself, and for most of those times, housing was not an above the fold issue. It was education, healthcare, other things. Today, housing is on the tip of everyone's tongue. It's Governor Healy's top priority. She used the first year of her administration to put forward, landmark housing legislation here in the Commonwealth. Here locally, Wayfinders, working with others in the community and the UMass Dining Institute, convened in 21 and 22 to better understand the need of our region here, Hampshire, Hampden, and Franklin counties. And there's lots of data in the housing study that we came out with. We came out with a two-phase housing study, but the big data point that we came out with was that by 2025, we'd have a 19,000 unit housing supply shortage, not enough units to meet the needs of our community. And that's just not just for the extremely low income, that's the highest need, but there's just not enough supply. So there needs to be more Valley CDCs and home cities and Wayfinders out there doing this work, because the need is also greatest for deeply affordable units. When looking at it from an affordability standpoint, there are 17,000 households looking for housing that's affordable at $500 or less. No, you can't find that without the subsidies that my colleagues have talked about, right? And so it requires that partnership with government to get it done at the state level in particular, where there are rental subsidies and major financial subsidies to help our project get built. One of the other things that's important that we found in the housing study was that by condition of age, much of our housing stock is in need of repair, whether it's for single family housing stock or multifamily. Most of it's built before 1970. So needs a significant amount of repair and rehab. So preservation is also a big need in addition to building new. Because if we don't preserve what we have, we run the risk of losing it. And you can drive around this community, even in this community where there's high demand, and see some buildings that are in disrepair. And when they get too far gone, it becomes very costly and maybe become a knockdown and a rebuild, but that's very costly to do. We are in the midst of working on a new housing study that we will hope will be useful to all of you and all advocates for housing. Will help you understand where we are today and also provide you with tools to really explain the impact of housing. Often when we go through these processes that Laura's talking about, there is opposition. People come up with all kinds of things. I was actually talking to a mayor from a town I won't name, who quoted me a study from 30 years ago about the cost of housing and its impact on communities. And I said, well, I don't know if that's really accurate today. People will bring up things like, it's going to make us build another school. That's when I think project maybe when Peter was working at Wayfinders, you might have heard things like that before. We have to build another school. Most of us know that, hopefully you know that a lot of our schools are actually way under capacity today. So there's a lot of myths that we want to hopefully break with the next housing study to give people really understanding the real impact of housing. There are costs, but there are lots of benefits as well. Some of the other kind of elements, Peter talked about in rural housing development, the biggest challenge there is utilities. If you have to bring in water and sewer and all those things, it becomes a big challenge. And we have a lot of land, but a lot of it is rural and not on water and sewer. It becomes difficult to develop on. Allegra was talking about local cost burdens, but when we add transportation and housing together, which is a key issue here in the Pioneer Valley And throughout Western Massachusetts, we do not have good public transportation, so people have to have cars. When you put those two costs together, many households are cost burdened in our region and finding it difficult to afford to stay here. Much higher cost burden than when you compare us to the greater Boston area because of that great public transportation. They may not think it's great, but it's better than what we got. In terms of the supply issues, very tight in terms of vacancy rates. That these numbers are a little dated, but very tight market in terms of supply. And then we live in a very segregated region. Most Black and Hispanic families are living in our gateway cities, particularly in Springfield and Holyoke and Chicopee. And so there's not a lot of housing opportunity or housing mobility in our region, not only because of cost, but because of other housing policies and practices over time that segregated our communities. And it's hard to break that without creating more housing choice and opportunity. We are doing some things. We have done some things here in the town of Amherst. Laura was talking about opportunities that can come forward with things like the East Street School. And the East Street School is an interesting story in that it wasn't at first an opportunity that solicited a lot of response. I'll just say that. When the town initially identified it as a housing site, they put it out individually as an opportunity. If I recall correctly, there were no responses to that because of the size of the site and what was expected. That said, the town, in dialogue with developers, including Wayfinders and others, heard about what they could do more to make it a more interesting site to develop. And if I'm remembering correctly, John, the town went out and acquired other land to put out to bid with the East Street School. And then when they put it out to bid again, there was much more interest for it. We were fortunate enough to win that opportunity, win that RFP, and are now over 2 sites that the town has put forward. We're developing 78 units of mixed income housing, meaning the original affordability interest, which is over 40 units of affordable housing we're going to be doing there. And we're going to have workforce housing and then some market rate units because we see the need across that spectrum for easing the housing need here in Amherst. We have some experience here in Amherst. We developed 2 other developments, Butternut Farms and Olympia Oaks. Each have their own long stories, which I won't get into unless you want me to during the Q&A. A few things to understand about the state investment in housing, especially today, the current things. Peter was talking about all the resources and how they come from the state and all those things that we need to do in selling tax credits and all of that. But a few things that have come forward over the last period here with the Healy District administration. You may not know that in the tax bill that Governor Healy championed and signed, there were some significant housing resources, an increase in the state low-income housing tax credit. There's a federal one and there's a state one. And so that increased the amount of credits available. There was also an increase in a program called another kind of incentive program to develop actually market rate housing in our gateway cities, which is something that they would like to see, and that's called the HDIP, or Housing Development Incentive Program. So there were 2 housing things in that package. But much more significantly and broadly, with the support of the legislature and the Healy District administration was able to enact the Affordable Homes Act, which would have been known as the Housing Bond Bill. The last Housing Bond Bill was back in 2018. It was $1.8 billion. And at that time, it was the biggest bond bill ever. Knowing Governor Healy, knowing what the housing crisis is, and the legislature knowing the housing challenges that we're facing now, you see the numbers a little bit bigger than that. It's an authorization amount. It's not an appropriation. So every year, they're looking at the ability of the Commonwealth to bond for that money, to actually raise the money to be able to fulfill the authorization amount. So we'll see if we'll be able to get to that 5.16 billion. But it's going to fund housing of all different types, from public housing to affordable housing developments that we develop to home ownership as well. It also includes lots of policy proposals, and the big challenge for the Commonwealth today is to write all the regulations and the policy that's in there. As Gaston was talking about ADUs and other things, yes, it's in there, but the regulatory regime, the the overseeing entities and agencies, they're not all situated yet. So it's going to take us about another year or so to get all those things in place. And if so, there's a homeownership production tax credit there that can help us build more homeownership units affordably, hopefully. And there's lots of other things, including ADUs, that can help alleviate the housing challenge. One of the things that was also enabled by the Affordable Homes Act was the creation of a commission, the Housing Affordability Commission, and the charge of that commission was to create a statewide housing plan. Believe it or not, even though we passed a $5.16 billion plan, we didn't have a plan. We haven't had a plan in years, decades. So the good thing is this is supposed to be a recurring 5-year plan. And so that plan will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And it is going to not only talk about what the need is, but it's also going to give a regional production goals. So organized by regional planning area. So the regional planning area for this area is the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. It covers Hampden and Hampshire County. So that'll be a goal for there. There's a Franklin Regional Council of Governments. There'll be a plan for there, a number for there, and there'll be one for the Berkshires. So it'll give us real insight in terms of what the Commonwealth wants us to strive for over the next 10 years of building housing, because it's going to take us a long time to fill this gap. There are additional commissions. There's another one on unlocking housing production. And there are some great recommendations coming out of that commission. I've got a little sneak preview into that hopefully will speed up the process, create more opportunities for communities to work hand in hand with developers to create housing more quickly and more efficiently in communities throughout the Commonwealth. And then there are several other commissions up there. I won't list them all out, but they will be rolled out over the next year or two. So important for all of us to understand the kind of state of play of what's going on at the state level as well as the local level. As already described, we need local housing champions, not only to talk to each of the housing projects that we're trying to develop in communities and come out and understand them and support them, but also to engage with our state legislative leaders and our folks in the State House to make sure that they understand how important it is to get those resources out to us. We have some concern in Western Massachusetts at times that, as Laura was saying before, that they don't quite see us and see all of our need here. And we have a great need. Many of the developments that you see happening in Eastern Massachusetts that are much bigger scale are happening because there are different economics in play. They can carry a lot more debt in those projects. They do other things, so they can do bigger projects. But we have a need for a real partnership with the state, and we need to make sure that our projects are seen and our issues are heard, and around both the capital authorizations, but also that we are prioritized in developing housing. So those are some of the things that I wanted to mention. I know John's going to talk a little bit more about local advocacy, so I don't want to steal his thunder there. But that's what I had for you today. There's a couple other data points I could go over here, but this one I just want to mention before I stop, if I could. In May of 2022, we started talking with our partners in housing in the region, municipalities and developers and planning commissions, knowing that we'd had a 19,000 unit housing supply gap, and that we weren't close to closing it. We didn't think we were anywhere close to closing it. So we started surveying our partners in these communities across Western Massachusetts. It's not a comprehensive survey. This is not every project that's there. But what we found in surveying the 50 members was that there were 19 projects planned for the next 5 years. We're going to create 1,500 units of housing and about 50 projects, and it was going to cost over $500 million. 1,500 units. Compare that to 19,000 that we need over 5 years. Now, let's say that number is off by a magnitude of double it. Let's say we're off by that much. Still, we're far from where we need to be. So we actually do need you to raise some of your hands to be not only housing advocates, but affordable housing developers. No, I'm just kidding. Not on the developer side, but we need more development to happen. We're not seeing enough development. We have 101 cities and towns in Western Massachusetts, just to give you a sense of things. And even as Peter was saying, in places like Pelham, we can find opportunity, one project at a time. They all matter. And so I wanted just to leave you with that kind of sense of how far we are from filling that gap in terms of even the opportunities that are in play today.
Thank you, Keith. Very inspiring, and the inspiration behind a lot of the energy here. John Hornick got involved with the town's housing and sheltering committee about 15 years ago and was part of the process of getting the town meeting to create this Affordable Housing Trust 2014. And after a few years on the trust, became chair for 5 years, and your goodwill is spread all around here. John, please.
Thank you, Gaston. Let's see. Okay, so this is my title slide. I just want to say, I really wanted to thank Keith, Peter, and Laura for the work that they do. The challenges they face are tremendous. And I will talk about at least one aspect of that, but it's remarkable to me that they have the fortitude and the strength to work through all of the challenges that they face. So let's talk about challenges from the public, which I think is, yep, there's my next slide. Okay, somebody actually looked somewhat carefully about objections that come up in communities to affordable housing developer. Her name is Karen Einstein. She's a sociologist at Boston University, and she studied 97 cities and towns in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And they looked at secondary analysis of available data in all of these communities for a wide range of proposals. Overwhelmingly, 14% of the thousands of participants in all the public meetings that they studied spoke in favor of these developments. That means 86% spoke against it. And that tells you that it's pretty difficult for a developer to come into a town and propose a project. And quite honestly, oops, I gotta go another slide. Amherst was going in that direction. There was highly visible, loud opposition to the East Gable project that Laura mentioned when they first proposed the project. There were people coming out to meetings that they held with the community, meetings that the town council held, meetings with CPA, and probably one or two other meetings that I'm not remembering. There was, as I said, loud and visible opposition to those. As Laura suggested, there was also opposition to the opposition. Recognizing what Karen Einstein had found, we decided it was necessary to be sure that there were people speaking in favor of this project. And it turns out it wasn't that hard to pull people together. In the end of the day, when town council held a public hearing, the ratio of people speaking was not 71 against, which is what we saw in Einstein's study, but 3-to-1 in favor. And the same was true for written comments to town council. So that was a huge change, but it didn't just happen. We can't assume that because a project comes along and it's a good idea, that everybody's going to support it. In fact, the default is many people are not going to support it. And unless you organize in favor, that project is going to go down. So that's great. Since then, there have been other projects in Amherst that have faced less opposition. Valley Community Development is doing this 30-unit development on Ball Lane in Amherst. I'm going to move right ahead. As Keith mentioned, Wayfinders is doing this project at the old East Street School and a second site on Belchertown Road that's pretty close together. And not shown, because I don't have a slide for it, is a project that would include a shelter, a year-round shelter for people who are unhoused, and a group of studio apartments on the same site that would appear at the old VFW hall in the center of Amherst. And that project is underway. The town paid for a architect, Narrowgate developer, to do preliminary drawings for that. And I'm assuming those are available on the town website. Yep, okay, thank you. So all of that is great. But despite that, there are significant problems here and elsewhere. And I kind of briefly outline them here. And the data exists to back this up. If you're a student, developers will continue to build high rent apartments in Amherst, but there were little or no growth on campus despite the demand. I'm not going to read all of these because I want to move us along so we get to the Q&A. You can take a look at them. I guess the bottom line is important. Unless town council makes major changes, hard to be optimistic about the future. I want to focus a little bit on older adults. We've seen projects for persons who are unhoused, persons needing studio apartments, persons needing family places. It's been a long time since the town did anything for older adults. And yet the population composition of the town is changing to the point where over 20% of the town will be older adults. Of course, over 50% will be people under the age of 25, because that's what we are. As Tom Kagelman once said to me, we are rapidly become a community of students and empty nesters. And so we need to focus on the needs for older adults. And one of the things that I personally think we can do is do a development for older adults at Hickory Ridge. Say Hickory Ridge, doesn't the town plan for a new fire station on Hickory Ridge? And the answer is yes, but I believe that that's a mistake. And I intend to write to town council members, including my friend Pat, basically pointing out the following. First of all, about 3 years ago, the town did a public survey of what people in the community thought should be on that site. And at the very top of the list was affordable housing. I don't know if anybody mentioned a fire station, and I don't know where that came from. In addition, the town promised that there would be a plan developed for Hickory Ridge for public comment. Have you seen the plan? I haven't. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Pat. Okay, so the only option right now is to put a fire station on that site, and the town has ignored all the input that it got for affordable housing. The town does a lot of gathering of public comment, but doesn't seem to do a lot with it. The third thing I want to mention is that, I can read my notes, Amherst firefighters have said that the site is inappropriate for a fire station, that it's not properly located. Sure. And can I point out that Chief Nelson and his successor both work for the town manager and town hall. So once the town decided there should be a fire station there, whatever the firefighters who are on the ground and have to manage these issues, it goes by the boards. But nonetheless, that is what they said. Let's see. Now, the fire station was supposed to go to the current site where the Department of Public Works is located. So the town has said, well, we're going to rebuild the Department of Public Works on that site. The problem with that is that site is not large enough to accommodate the needs of the Department of Public Works. So the town's going to have to find another location for part of the Department of Public Works. Well, it would make sense to me anyway, to look for a single site that would accommodate all of the needs in one place for the Department of Public Works and let the fire station go where it was gonna go and use that site on East Pomeroy Lane at Hickory Ridge, West Pomeroy Lane for a fire station.
Okay.
For affordable housing, sorry, right. Thank you, Keith. That is a beautiful site. And it's a site that would be great for housing, in my mind, especially for elder adults or older adults. So my birthday's coming up. I would appreciate it if all of you, in honor of my birthday, would send cards and letters to town council saying, putting the fire station there is a bad idea. And what we need to put there is affordable housing. So that's one thing you can do to support affordable housing. As Laura mentioned, it's not easy to find property in Amherst. And this is a very good property for affordable housing. So there are other things you can do to support affordable housing. Keith mentioned some of them. There are a lot of local as well as state processes where these things get discussed either before town council or before town committees. And if you don't weigh in, honestly, nobody else is. But those problems are going to get ignored. So I'd like to see you weigh in on the issue of Hickory Ridge and also look at some of those other opportunities to speak to these issues in town government. I should mention, Gaston is looking at me. And that reminds me, I wanted to look at him because I really think the Housing Trust should become an advocate for affordable housing at the Hickory Ridge site. And I will conclude with that. Thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you for firing us up, John. I'm pleased to invite Mindy Dome, who needs no introduction here. I'll remind you, she's been advocating for us on Beacon Hill since 2019. And before that, she spent a half decade serving the community as director of the Amherst Survival Center. She will be moderating our rich Q&A. Thank you so much, Mindy.
Thank you. So now we know what it takes to be a champion, John.
That's right. That's what it
Can we
looks
give a
like.
round of applause for John Hart? Before I was going to begin, I was going to say our developers are the champions, but when John goes into that advocacy pitch, I'm like, okay, I'm writing my letter when I get home. So I have cards that have questions on them. And if you asked a question, could you just raise your hand on the card so that if you want to say it? No? Should I just? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. So the first one is, for the different projects discussed tonight, this is for the developers. What was the cost per unit of housing, 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom to build? And in general, what's the range or cost per unit? I think that's the question. So Keith, do you want to go first? We'll go this way.
No. Let Laura go first.
Laura,
If I press on this, will it work? How about now? Ooh. So cost is something we think about without ceasing. It's been a rocky ride over the last couple of years in terms of cost. We used to be able to bring the per unit price in, under 300,000 in Western Mass. It was higher in Eastern Mass. I think when we got to East Gables, I mentioned that escalation. We kind of hit it right as lumber prices were peaking. And I think our per unit cost there was around 325,000, 350 a unit, and they were tiny units. At this point, we are building some new construction townhouse style developments in Northampton. They're coming in around, they're close to 600,000 a unit. We're doing an adaptive reuse of the Northampton nursing home property. That's coming in around 525 a unit. Those are studio 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't really have a breakdown by bedroom size. We look at it more as kind of the whole thing. Bedrooms tend to be cheap space to build as opposed to kind of kitchens and baths. But we are seeing just incredibly high numbers in soft costs and especially in construction costs. I don't know if anybody else has better news.
No better news. Probably worse news, actually. Depends on the projects. We have projects all in that $500,000 to $600,000 range, depending on the situation. Well, I would say though about some of those projects, as you were talking about, that Laura mentioned before, time is money. Some of these projects could have been done a long time ago if both the processes and COVID really did a number on a lot of our pipelines. So we're all seeing a lot of activity right now, but a lot of the activity was stalled as there was a run up in prices, run up in interest rates. For us, we were funded, and then our project didn't work anymore because our budgets were broken. We had to reapply. So there is a real cost of delay, and it's a wholly different world. So when you look at the $5 billion and you compare it to the $1.8 billion from 2018, you say, well, we're going to be able to do a lot more. It's actually not as big of a bump as it looks like in the end, because the cost has risen so high here, and it's even higher in Eastern Massachusetts. We're talking $750,000 and more a unit.
We get asked a lot. I think people think it's affordable housing. It should be affordable to build it or create it. It's kind of the flipped opposite. So in order to make it affordable for the people who live in it, we have to kind of front load the cost of building it. So we can't carry big mortgages and things like that. We're really leaning on public subsidy. And when you lean on public subsidy, you get a lot of rules that you have to comply with. So our new construction and renovation, we're leaning hard on handicapped accessibility. We're meeting very high energy standards. We're meeting design standards. So things that you wouldn't necessarily have to meet in the private sector. In Northampton, we can't use fossil fuels. We didn't use fossil fuels at East Gables. We're just kind of building in a pretty high-tech, energy efficient way that's more expensive. The other thing I would mention is we're typically carrying 99-year deed restrictions. So you think about a lot of money up front, but then you have an asset that is going to be restricted through its deed for generations. And so again, and part of getting to that place where you have that leverage is part of the cost of developing affordable housing. We carry huge legal costs for our work. So those are just some of the reasons why the numbers are shockingly high.
wait.
I
One
would
more-
just add,
one more-
just quickly, in terms of the Amethyst Brook Apartments in Pelham, it's just over 600,000 a unit, so similar price range.
The question was, of the $600,000, how much of that is construction versus soft costs? So that we can really see what the difference is between how expensive it is to build and how expensive it is to try to build.
Yeah, our big number is construction. I think it used to be, the soft costs were a higher percentage of the total budget, but construction costs are so crazy. I'd say 80% might be construction. It depends. I mean, the acquisition can also be a big number and it varies from project to project. 75, 80% construction. You know, I'm looking at new construction condos in Northampton going for 850. So it's really, when you look at what's for sale on the market and you say, well, I can buy a 4-bedroom house for 500, 500, it's old. It's not new. It's because if you do buy a new build, you're going to pay 850 to $1 million in our area. It's
Can I also point out that one of the points I'm also hearing is opposition increases the cost. So, and the longer the opposition is, then the timepiece also then kicks up the cost. So opposition doesn't only speak to undermining a particular project, it could undermine development overall in a town. And you didn't mention this, but what I've heard also is that the proposed tariffs that the new president is talking about is going to further escalate costs because a lot of the supplies that these folks need in order to build housing is coming from Canada. So I'm throwing that out there. If I'm wrong, please jump in. But so we're looking at that 5.1 billion sort of not being enough. And it's also that 5.1 billion is sort of dedicated to specific kinds of programs. And not all of those programs are the kind of housing that you all want to be building. So that's the other piece of it.
For the audience who's on Zoom, please know that you can put your questions in the chat. There's a Q&A tab.
Did you want to ask a question? Okay. Second question for developers. What is it, and we may have already answered this to some extent, but I'm going to ask it and you can say, I've answered it already. What is a barrier to development here in Amherst that you can imagine a way around or through? And what is that possible solution? And actually, I'm going to open this up to John also, because you seem to have some ideas on this. So I'm going to repeat it. What is a barrier to development here in Amherst that you can imagine a way around or through? And what would that possible solution be?
I'll respond first, I guess, since you pointed to me, Mindy. I think the barrier or the opposition that was faced, I've got this. Yeah, thanks. With the East Gables development was the strongest opposition that we've seen in the last few years in Amherst. We beat that opposition. And as I mentioned, there are at least 3 other projects that have come up since then that generated a little bit of opposition, but not nearly as much. So I think the key or the way around is that once you demonstrate that you can beat that opposition, then it's probably less likely to form, at least in the immediate future. I certainly hope that's the case. As I said earlier, I'm a little disappointed in Town Hall for rushing ahead to put a fire station on a place where we should have affordable housing without really a public process.
Yeah, one of the things that concerns me a lot is we did beat the opposition. But if you look at the district that opposition rose from, and you look at the districts for the East Street School and even Ball Lane, those are districts that have more diversity in income, maybe is one way of saying it. Okay, so that I think that we did get East Gables. I'm going to try to contain what I really would like to say about some of that opposition. But I think that it has to do with privilege. It has to do with who the abutters are. I think in the neighborhoods that we're talking about where these projects are building, there are more working class people still, even in Amherst. There, you know, and that makes a difference because those are the people who came forward and supported East Gables. We didn't get a change in the neighborhood around East Gables. So we have to look at that. Oh, I'm Pat.
Anybody else want it? Yeah.
So I put in a plug for a 40R overlay district. It's something that the town has looked at before. It's something that they use in Northampton. We've zoned multiple projects under 40R overlay. It's very fast. It's a by right use for affordable housing only. So it doesn't entail the year-long process of the state and the locality doing the 40B. It's much more streamlined. So essentially, the town selects, it's an overlay over some existing areas where you think you have, it's appropriate for there to be more dense development. If y'all can agree where that is. And then you put that in place and developers have a really smooth, straight path through the planning board, not through the zoning board, to get permitted. So that would be a huge, huge, huge asset to developers in Amherst.
And the town gets some incentives for when the housing gets built.
And they
Keith,
pay
can you
the
say that
town.
again, Keith?
What Laura was going to say, and the town it's not just doing the district, but that you get an incentive payment.
Yes, so every time you permit under 40R, every time you establish a 40R district, there's a payment made to the town.
Right. So we're developing 60 units in South Hadley in their 40R district. So as an example of four-story apartment building there in a commercial plaza. So it's an opportunity where you can say, this is where we want housing, right? This is where we want denser housing in our community rather than have developers kind of hunting around. You're telling them, this is the bullseye. Work here. And in return, you get incentive payments when we build the housing.
So say, can you hear me? Yeah. So say we were looking at University Drive as a place where we're saying, we would like you to build housing here. How do we go about?
I should say
40R?
build affordable housing.
Yes. Okay.
I don't, on University Drive, I don't know if that's the intent right now. Right. So.
Okay, we have another question. Did you want to ask? I thought we were going to alternate, Rebecca. Okay. Housing for unhoused and low income is clearly a critical problem. Workforce and middle income housing is equally critical. Are there mechanisms and solutions for this problem? Is anything in progress now to facilitate building this type of housing on local, state, or the federal levels? Anybody?
Sure. Yeah, some of the housing that we're doing right now, I mentioned the project that we're doing here in Amherst is 78 units of mixed income. So it includes both workforce units or units around 80 to 100% of AMI, and then some market rate units. So the majority of it's 40 plus units are affordable, and then the rest is a mix of those things. So there are state programs to support some of that, not the to provide some subsidy for particularly the workforce units, the 80 to 100% of AMI units. There are programs like I mentioned before, the Housing Development Incentive Program, which is for gateway cities only. So think when you're thinking about this region, think Holyoke, Chicopee, Springfield, to build market rate units there to diversify their housing stock. They have a lot of more low income units. So there are programs like that. I know Home City and Valley are also building homeownership projects that are also for more 80 to 100% of AMI households as well. So there are new state programs, Commonwealth Builder as a program that they're working under right now to do that. So there are some, but none of them are, as Peter was saying, are as big as the tax credit program, which we use today. At the federal level, there is some potential legislation that could be attached to a tax reform package that could create a federal homeownership production tax credit. There's a bipartisan support for it. So that could be a big boost if it works, but we have to see what it looks like. But that could happen with tax reform. But those are some examples of things that for more middle income housing, if you will.
On the homeless front, one of the things the state has done is asking us increasingly to integrate that housing into rental developments. And so when you apply for low-income housing tax credits, you're expected to have a percentage of units that have a preference for folks who are homeless. We are just not keeping up with the numbers. So.
I think also recently UMass has announced that they're going to be developing a housing plan that will include workforce development. So we're going to be seeing, thankfully, more development, or at least ideas around how some of their unused property could be used in that way, which is a really positive development. You know, the more housing there is at all levels, the more people, the more the need will be sort of addressed. And then we can also focus more on affordable housing. Next question. A Section 8 voucher cannot cover the costs of rent in Amherst without an extra subsidy from a large apartment complex. Why doesn't a voucher cover a fair market rent? I'm going to let you take it, Keith.
Section 8 is basically flatline. Section 8 is otherwise known as a housing choice voucher program. Is a rental subsidy that is in short supply and is basically underfunded at the federal level. It's basically just so it is a federal set of policies that go into that and a federal appropriation. So Section 8 is not a growing resource. We are growing. Massachusetts is a unique state. It has its own rental voucher called the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program. And what they look at is, in order to set rents, is they're looking at the fair market rent in the area. Most recently, the Commonwealth has started to use small area fair market rents, which are looking at rents in the zip code rather than in the metropolitan statistical area, which helps. It increases the rent capability. But what we've seen is, you're asking why, so that there's the reason why the vouchers are the way they are. They're looking at, kind of an understanding of the rent by looking at what's already being rented out there. Even in the zip code, it may not be enough. But the asking prices are factoring in increased costs for owners, right? An increased desire to make money. Market rate housing, people are in it to make money, right? So they have to cover their costs. And what we have seen, whether you're affordable or market rate, is a run up in expenses to operate housing today, right? Insurance costs have doubled in some cases for us, and they continue to grow. Other operating costs, utilities, staff to operate the properties, all those things have increased. Those things get passed on to renters by increased rents. And so we have seen during the pandemic, what was really interesting here in our region is that we saw rents steadily rise. You say, what's so interesting about that? Well, if you look at a place like Boston, you saw, and other large metro areas, you saw rents actually drop during the pandemic and then go back up. They're high, but but not here. We saw steady rises in increases in rents, and those haven't been coming down. So, and at the same time, we have this challenge with kind of low to moderate incomes that are not keeping up. So the rental vouchers are kind of our solution, but they don't get us all the way there because of the way the rents are calculated, and they're not being funded at the level that we need to. My hope would be there's a budget that Rep. Don will be looking at closely. There is an increase in the Massachusetts rental voucher program, but it's really just treading water for that program right now, covering the increased costs that are anticipated. There's not going to be that many new vouchers. We need to grow that program because the federal government isn't growing it to be able to create more affordable mobility options for people with those vouchers, and create and to give to developers as well to create what we call project-based units where we have that affordability in the unit that people can avail themselves of.
I just want to add something to what Keith said. 2 or 3 years ago, I was in touch with the Amherst Housing Authority, which manages the voucher program in Amherst and actually this area. And they would have so many vouchers to give out each year. And typically, more than 50% of those vouchers were unused because people could not find an affordable rental in Amherst, even having the voucher. So that's the consequence of what Keith is talking about, that people seeking places, even though the vouchers are theoretically available, simply can't find a place that will accept the voucher.
So there could be a bright spot on the horizon. So one of the so the fair market rent is an established amount. If you have a voucher and you want to rent a 2-bedroom apartment and the state and feds say the fair market rent is $1,400, you can't rent an apartment for more than that. So people can't find apartments at that cost in Amherst because they're more expensive. Part of that is happening because Amherst is in the Springfield statistical metropolitan area. So it's grouped in with a bunch of Hampden County towns that are larger. And so it seems to artificially depress those rents relative to actual rents in Amherst and Hadley and Northampton, this kind of tier up here. I'm hearing they're going to have a new MSA for our region. Do you know anything about that?
I heard that also, but I'm not sure what happens to these federal designations in this new climate. So we'll
Yeah.
see. I mean, I'm being very honest, right? Like something might have been very, we might have had a different way to look at that 2 months ago or 6 months ago. Now I'm not sure.
It would have helped.
Yeah, and the Commonwealth has tried to increase the rents that it can offer through their program. So it's 110% of fair market rent now. They tried to increase it to 120% of fair market rent, but it was too costly. They didn't have enough money. So they had to pull that back. But John's point is important though. There's not enough units. That's why we need to be developing more units that are affordable for people. Even with the voucher, people are searching and sometimes have to return it.
I want to say something, but I'm also moderating, so I really can't say anything.
Say it.
Well, I wanted to say that also another thing that I heard with the housing authorities in Amherst and throughout the state is that there were these vacant units that we kept hearing about that were in housing unit buildings. And when they did some digging to find out, well, why were they standing vacant? When there were people who needed those units, it was mostly personnel issues on the housing authority's place that they didn't have enough maintenance people to actually clean up the units between tenants to move people in, which is just mind-boggling that would happen. But the bond does have some money for housing authorities specifically around these issues, because I think it was just so terribly embarrassing that there were actually vacant units because they couldn't get cleaned up. Okay, enough of Mindy, although then you gave me this one, and this is, I think, maybe for me. But I'm gonna let panelists talk first and bash away, and then I'll talk. How do we move the real estate transfer fee forward? Anybody want to take it? So you may know that Amherst last session had a home rule for a transfer fee, which didn't come out of committee positively. There were some efforts on the housing bond to try to get a transfer fee. The governor actually put it in her bond. It did not pass the legislature. And I think we have to keep trying. We have to keep begging that we need money for it. And we need to launch a very large support for it, because there is a large, well-funded opposition for it in the eastern part of the state. That's any thoughts?
I will add to that briefly, and that is that Joe Comerford and her staff worked tirelessly to try to get that housing bill passed or added to whatever the bond bill, and they weren't able to do it. I thought they did a great job, But at the end of the day, the developer community was much stronger in opposing it. Will that change? I hope it will.
The private developer community. Yeah.
Well, and it, it's really, lots, as you're saying, there's well-organized opposition, well-funded opposition. And so I think a statewide campaign needs to happen in order to overcome that.
Yeah, I agree. Statewide campaign meeting also in lots of towns. So I think one of the things that people in Amherst can do is contact the people that you know, your friends, your family, your loved ones who live in other towns in Massachusetts, and start growing this movement. Some of you may know that bill filing deadline in the legislature for this session was last Friday. I think there were a couple of bills filed around a transfer fee, and there'll be more. There'll be home rules. So we'll see it still come up. And you may know that the biggest town that wants a transfer fee was Boston, and it was denied too. So it's not an east-west thing. It's a money, no money thing. So, okay. Any other thoughts? Oh, still more. Okay. How much more does it cost to build in Amherst versus other communities because of local regulations?
No, I've worked on a couple of projects when I was with Wayfinders in Amherst, and there's not any significant obstacles in Amherst that don't also exist in some of the other communities here. So I'd say none.
I think it's hard to quantify. I would argue that because Amherst is very process oriented, there is a time cost. And I don't know exactly what that is. It's not unique to Amherst, but this is the most process heavy place I've ever developed. We see that consistently, whether there's opposition or not. And it just adds time, and time is money.
So Laura, can I follow up and ask you a question? Would that 40R overlay address that issue?
It would help. I mean, it would help because you would be taking a different zoning path that's generally more streamlined. And you'd be going to the planning board. When you do a 40B, you're going to the zoning board, and it always feels odd. They don't do it very often. It's just an odd situation for everybody in the room. Whereas if you're going before a planning board, they're very facile and used to doing site plan review. So if you can shift where it goes, it's a smoother ride.
Any other thoughts? How feasible is modular to reduce costs? I love these questions.
I'm actually working on a project in East Hampton right now. It's 96 units, 5 stories on a steel podium. And when we started on this project, and it's a very rectangular building, so it was originally conceptualized for modular construction. And our construction manager priced it out as stick-built, as modular, and as panelized construction. And I'll explain panelized in a moment. And it turned out that panelized was the most cost-effective option there. So modular, obviously, they assemble almost entire apartments or modules, and they have a crane that delivers them to the site. In this case, would be on top of a steel podium. And with panelized, they factory build entire panels of the building, which have the insulation, the windows, conduit in the walls, a lot of the electrical work already done. Those are built in a factory and then brought to the site and assembled on the site. And so I do think that panelized construction has some, but both have options for reducing cost and helping. What we learned was that at 96 units, which is big for our region, that wasn't enough scale to really make modular work. That our construction manager told us that it had to be up around 200 units to really make that work. And we don't have too many of those projects here. In the panelized construction, right now we're talking to a company that builds these panels in a factory in Baltimore, Maryland. So it's, even with that cost, still reasonable, but that same company is building a plant in Windsor, Connecticut. So that may help reduce the cost again in the future. So interestingly enough, I had a conversation about this East Hampton project with the Carpenters Union just last week. And when they learned that we were planning on building panelized construction their view was, hey, look, we're just looking for opportunities for our, I had expected some pushback from them on that point. And they said, you know, you're not going to get any fight from us on this. We see that that may be one of the futures for building housing, not just affordable housing. And we want to help facilitate it and we want to find opportunities for our members. So they were very encouraging to us and that was really good to hear.
Great to hear. Any other thoughts?
No, I was just going to ask Peter, he's talking about doing a multifamily development that's, so it may be different if you're looking at building, you know, townhomes or, you know, single scattered site units. It's hard to answer the question directly, but I think Peter's got the best experience right there on a multifamily development.
I think what's also interesting is depending on the scale, that's going to affect what kind of product you can use, and that will ultimately affect the price per unit. So the more affordable units you build, probably the biggest bang for your buck in terms of build. That may have been obvious, but sorry. What are your favorite developments in the region and the best local policies? I don't know who's asking these questions, but you guys are asking rock star questions. So this is like, you know, like, what's your favorite development? And we won't take offense when it's not in Amherst, if it's not in Amherst. We want to know. And what's your favorite local policies? Laura, I'm going to hit you. What?
Local policies.
Local policies and your favorite local development.
Yeah,
Laura,
I'm
go.
gonna hit the 40R again. That's my favorite local policy. It's a statewide tool, but it's applied locally. One of my very favorite projects is one of Peter's. It's Lou 155 in Northampton, because I think it's a stunning building and a great location. I've always liked Butternut Farm, which was designed and built by Wayfinders, which is here in Amherst, because it fits in a rural community so well. It looks like a series of kind of connected outbuildings and, you know, it's not a big box at all. So those are some of my favorites actually in the area.
Peter.
Well, in terms of local policies, I would go with the Community Preservation Act funds. You know, as you know, there's three buckets that they can put money into, historic preservation, open space, and affordable housing. And I found that most communities have the hardest time putting it into affordable housing development because with the other sources, they make a grant and the money gets spent right away. Whereas we come to them and say, yeah, we want your money, but it's really not going to be needed for like 2 or 3 years until the housing is actually built. But it's still really important money. I can't stress how important it is that, you know, the town steps up and, you know, awards money to a project and sends the right signals to the folks in the state. So that's my favorite policy. And I would agree with Laura, the Live 155 building, urban infill development in downtown Northampton. And it kind of fits really well in that location.
If I'm not mistaken, wasn't the Pelham project partially funded by CPA money from the town of Pelham?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was important. And Northampton and Amherst have put CPA money into projects, and that's critical.
From a, I don't know if it's a policy, but along the same lines of CPA, municipal housing trust. Any community that has a municipal housing trust that has money in it, that's great. There are a lot of them that don't have money in them. So any place that has it, that has money in it, that they can add to the sources for a project is great. I'm going to give a shout out to an adaptive reuse by Home City. I'm going to get what's the name of the school again? Elias Brookings School. Terrific job there in Springfield, redeveloping that school into housing after a big tornado that came through that community. A terrific adaptive reuse there. But they maintain the gym. I can't get over how you maintain the gym there, which is it's just a stunning project. So I'll add that to the list. So new construction is always nice to build, but it's also when you can make something new out of something old.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the microphone back to you to finish us up. Okay. Oh. So is the question, how do you change the planning board's decision? Question is, what are other zoning regulations that would help spur development of affordable housing in Amherst for seniors specifically?
Well, I think it should, zoning is often done without thought um, to actual, the challenges of development and particularly financing development. So I was hearing you say, let's upzone so you have, you can do 2-unit homes. Maybe there's financing out there for that, not for affordable, that we're just gonna do a 2-unit home here or there. So I think really thinking about, and one of the things that we're looking at right now is we're doing a analysis of all the developable land in Western Mass to look at where are the development opportunities that are kind of have a community scale, like you're talking about, that are maybe not the 20-unit building, and what would be the financing tools that we would need to build it, because they don't exist today. So if you went to the HLC, Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, or Mass Housing, and look for a program, does it have a match? If it doesn't have a match, it's not going to be built, but at least not affordably anyway. You might be able to build it on a market rate basis, but that's going to be a challenge. So I think really understanding what developers need, which is the financing, and if you're looking at affordable, it's going to be what are the subsidies that line up with what you want to see. If they don't exist, that doesn't mean they can't exist. And so there's a lot of talk about, there's a term of art right now being used called missing middle housing. It's both looking at smaller kind of community scale development, anywhere from 2 to 8 plexes, and even smaller apartment buildings, 10 units. But there's really not financing for that today, not affordably anyway. So the state could create a program around that, and it could be, again, for more middle income people from 80 to 120% of AMI. Again, no program exists today. That doesn't mean it couldn't if we were able to show that there's a need for it. And Amherst can't go alone. It has to be a whole kind of effort statewide that we're going to say we want to create that kind of housing, and we need to create the capital for it in the next bond bill or before the next bond bill happens. So that's some of the work we're doing now to analyze the opportunity in our region and try to partner with other regions to see if we can advance something like that. But I think zoning on its own is helpful, but if you zone something that can't be financed, it won't be helpful.
Before we leave, sadly, I want to make a comment about the 800-pound gorilla immediately to our north, and that is the University of Massachusetts. A couple of people sent to me, and somebody mentioned this evening, that the university has a great new public plan that would help to expand housing on campus. Now, I saw a plan like that, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago. And you all may also have seen that plan. Do you know what happened with that plan? Exactly nothing. Thanks, Pat. So I can't say I'm optimistic about seeing a new plan. I wish I could be. I think we are desperately in need of more housing on the UMass campus. They severely restricted housing for families on the campus, and they didn't add much in the way of graduate student housing to replace the units that they also killed there. So the university needs to do a lot more than it's doing, and we need to apply some public pressure to the university, hopefully to get them to move in the right direction.
I thought you were going to say, when you said to the north, you were going to talk about the housing development that's proposed for Lebanon, but that's just me. Can I just say all, and then I'm going to give it to you guys to speak. You said something, Keith, that I really want to underscore. Amherst can't go it alone. The issues and the challenges that we have are not really unique Many communities have it, but the way to build public pressure is to link arms with other communities that are also facing it, because alone we get dismissed. So, not just housing, across the board with every policy. And the only times we are successful is when we link arms. So I just wanted to underscore that because I think that's really important. And that means linking arms with not only other rural communities, but also the gateway cities that are in our region, because we're all facing this together. Gaston?
Wait,
I'm
Gaston,
giving it-
can I just jump in really quick, going off the linking arms metaphor? And this is related specifically to the Housing Trust. We, in our new strategic plan, have identified 3 subcommittee areas that we have split into. One is, again, education, one is development, and one is financing. And our hope is that there will be more community involvement in our subcommittee meetings. So if you are interested in furthering your advocacy and support for affordable housing in Amherst and beyond, you can check out the Housing Trust website. It would have all those subcommittee meetings listed, and they are all available to join on Zoom.
Well, thank you, everybody. I mean, my main thanks is that all of you in this room showed up. Of course, thank you to those on Zoom, but it's really wonderful to have a community experience. Thank you, Rebecca, League of Women Voters, for pulling us together. And I want to give a shout out to Greg Rishane, who is an assistant town developer and housing aficionado who really brings a lot of energy to what we're doing on the Housing Trust. Thank you to the developers and John for pulling us together. Cheers, Mindy. Thank you so much.